Hey Julie, what's the fluff?
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie, and this is MJ Hobby Corner. Today, I have for you Malifaux 1.5, Episode 1, Part 2, I guess. But there's going to be a lot more parts to this because I've decided to stick with Malifaux 1.5 for a while, dive in and learn more about it because I think it's very interesting. So, this is Part 2. We are going to be talking about the Resurrectionists. Um, We'll learn about them, we'll discuss a couple characters, and then I've picked a great story to read at the end. So, without further ado, why don't we jump into the Resurrectionists? The description begins with a quote from Dr. Douglas McMorning, who is a main character of the game. People say, I hate the living. It's not true. I just happen to see the potential inside all people. Those great things anyone can do if they aren't trapped in their own consciousness and morals. And when I unlock that potential, death is the side effect. I can't help that. Let's continue. Resurrectionist. The name is a cruel joke, amusing only to the twisted minds of murderers and grave robbers. Resurrectionists reanimate the dead, but the trade of resurrectionists results not in a body restored, but a soulless puppet. Their practices are particularly appalling to the citizens of Malifaux, who already must contend with the occupational dangers of the mines and the nightmare spawn of the Neverborn. That some of the most terrible monsters this world knows are fellow men and women, former friends and family, is a grim realization. And it certainly would be, wouldn't it? Humanity has a long tradition of honoring their dead. In Malifaux, the death effect of soul stones provides difficult existential and religious questions, and resurrectionists are blatant in their desecration of human life. The reanimated serve only the selfish, unconscionable goals of those masters of death. On the topic of resurrectionist threat, there is unanimous support by the population of Malifaux to hunt and capture these barbarous individuals. The Governor General's crusade against necromancy of the resurrectionists has overwhelming public support. His own personal staff suffered a grisly attack days after he won his position. In later weeks, the missing members of his cabinet were identified in a series of robberies, kidnappings, and murders. It was only after an extensive investigation that the true nature of these attacks came to light, that the bodies of the Governor General's staff had succumbed to an unidentified resurrectionist. With that discovery, a special task force, the Death Marshals, were organized to combat the resurrectionist threat. Their methods lacked subtlety, but they developed a sophisticated profile used to identify and apprehend their targets. A resurrectionist is often a single individual working alone or with one or two loyal assistants. Due to the gruesome nature of the work, these necromancers are forced to ply their trade in secret. Each one comes upon his craft through individual study, whether through science, magic, or some other worldly pact. The art fosters creative resourcefulness as fresh corpses in strict privacy are continuously in short supply. Okay, so let me pause there for a second because this kind of it made me laugh when I first read it because when I think of creative resourcefulness, um, I think of things like you get lost and you figure out how to survive on your own in the woods, or something breaks and you can't fix it with a new part, so you're resourceful and you figure out how to make it work. That's resourcefulness to me. Martine is very resourceful, um, and that's what it made me think of. And then to read that it says, the art fosters creative resourcefulness as fresh corpses and strict privacy are in short supply. Yeah, I guess it would be resourceful to find fresh bodies in private. I don't know. That just made me laugh. Um, just me? It's just me? Yeah, I figured. Just okay. Let's move on. The governor's witch hunt has forced necromancers into the abandoned quarantine areas of Malifaux. There, these grim wizards are constantly at odds with the Neverborn, and only those necromancers who show significant aptitude are able to survive. These enterprising individuals fortify the abandoned districts they claim and populate them with shambling undead militias to fight off rival resurrectionists and Neverborn attackers. The Death Marshals have attempted to raid these outposts with moderate success and chilling discoveries. Despite the obvious individualism inherent in these criminals and their methods, curiously similar sigils, devices, and journal entries suggest some amount of shared knowledge. The governor has also discovered that by pushing resurrectionists into the abandoned portions of the city, they have unwittingly encouraged the looting of these areas. Necromancer strongholds are filled with artifacts collected from the haunted streets of Malifaux. I wonder what kind of things they found. I wonder what kind of artifacts are littering the ground in Malifaux. Let's see if we can find out. Of particular note are the large libraries maintained by these grave robbers, books salvaged from ruins of Malifaux's past. While only a few have managed to be seized intact, the texts suggest a dark patron, a spirit tutoring the necromantic arts, communicating subtly through the mysteries of science and magic, and tempting those who crave forbidden knowledge. These texts and artifacts seem to be the source of the shared techniques common amongst these criminals. While many of those aware of these texts believe this patron to be simple metaphor, other guild members fear this grave spirit is real. Those fears magnify when one considers the armies of the undead marshaled in the outskirts of the city from the vaulted hideaways of their masters. That these resurrectionists might be the unwitting lieutenants of a malicious patron would mean that the city is under siege and that every dying man is a potential recruit for an ever-growing army of the undead. Okay, so that's a little bit about the resurrectionists. It's an interesting faction, I think. I do have a favorite faction, and I'll be covering that next week. But I do like the resurrectionists. I think it adds a lot to the story. So, all right, so that's the resurrectionists. Now we are going to talk about Seamus the Mad Hatter. Seamus the Mad Hatter. Seamus's infamy is known throughout Malifaux. Stories of his grisly crimes are even painted across newspaper headlines back home. The hunt for this daring murderer is a sensation discussed at length in the parlors and coffee shops of New Amsterdam. To them, Malifaux is the frontier not because of its distance from civilization, but because of the lawlessness that Seamus's continued freedom exemplifies. While the guild and other factions busy themselves with a struggle for soulstone, Seamus has discovered power in the ruins of the city itself. Vast libraries are full with arcane secrets of a long-vanished race. From these secrets, he has divined the art of necromancy, and in the streets of the city, he preys on the young and beautiful to practice his craft. That would be quite scary if you were young and beautiful and walking the streets of Malifaux. course, I wouldn't have to worry about that. Anyway, just the citizens of Malifaux fear this criminal above all others. He is more terrifying than the monstrous never-born creatures that haunt this city. His appearance has prompted riots, distractions he's used to cover his daring raids on guild and union property. The scope of his crimes will only grow as his goal to refine his skill with undeath into an art will bring ever grander exploits. Unlike his fellow resurrectionists, Seamus takes a very literal interpretation of the volumes he's unearthed. In those pages are described an unknowable spirit, a sentience embodied in the dark energies of necromancy. This spirit, as it is written, communicates subtly through the practice of ritual and scientific experimentation. This spirit's power flows into this world, conjured by the techniques of necromancy and embodied in unlife. With grim zeal, Seamus reaches toward this grave spirit, eagerly pursuing its whispers. He pays no heed to any agenda this dark patron may have, only to the carnal mysteries he might learn. So that is Seamus, the Mad Hatter, and we'll be reading about him in a moment. There's one more that I would like to go over with you before I continue. Here we go. Okay. Madame Cybele. Dressed in her cat house best, the corpulent ex-owner of Madame Cybele's saloon now exists as a reanimated nightmare of desire and disgust. Once admired for her ability to read a man seeking her girl's affections, she grossly misread the individual who would end her life and resurrect her and her girls into eternal servitude. Because they were once her employees, Rotten Bells still answer, albeit in a limited fashion, to her moaning orders. Many foes have fallen to her unearthly strength and corrupted weapons. Her provocative manner of dressing, once sensual, can still cause opponents to lose their edge in a fight. Whether from horror or from perverse attraction is thankfully unknown. Okay, so that's Madame Cybele and her, or Madame, however you pronounce it, Cybele and her Rotten Bells. All right, well, we've learned about the Resurrectionists a little bit. We've talked about a few characters. And now it's time for the story. So grab the beverage of your choice, grab some snacks, whatever you want, buckle up, and let's jump on in. Okay, so we're ready for the story. The name of the story is Snow on a Tombstone. So let's find out what this is all about. Seamus sat atop a large crypt, lazily directing his undead minions as he looked down on the city. He smiled as he beheld the sprawling ruins of an ancient, forgotten people, and then, squinting, held one thumb over them, as a child might before he crushes an ant. Malifaux had been called the greatest discovery in the history of mankind, and Seamus had to agree. Everyone sought relics and treasures, wonders beyond their wildest dreams, but he had actually found one. In an old library, long abandoned by its collector, Seamus had found the dust-covered book containing science unknown in the world he was born to. The secrets to raising the dead. He brought down his thumb with a gleeful snigger. "Oh, hey, Molly girl, pay attention." Seamus drew out a watch from his breast pocket and noted the time. Springing to his feet, he looked toward the outskirts of the city. There he could easily make out the flicker of the breach, the portal that connected this world to Earth. On his watch, the second hand clicked away until it struck the hour, and just then a powerful locomotive burst through the great opening, a black surge of smoke billowing into the distant sky. Right on time, Molly girl. The whole thing's one well-oiled machine, it is. Thing's a wonder. Seamus snapped close his pocket watch and tucked it away before turning his head toward Molly Swidgepidge, who was seated beside him on the crypt. Reanimation didn't seem to agree with her, as she was hunched over, throwing up another mouthful of blood onto the ground with a sickly cough. Damn, Molly, you're a disgusting creature. Seamus didn't understand where all the blood could come from. It had been several months since her death, and he'd thought the girl would dry out eventually, but she continued to bubble with an unending river of red ooze. It was almost enough to disturb even his morbid thoughts. Almost. Jumping down from his perch, he took a moment to adjust his top hat and smooth his latest tailored city coat with his hands. Nearby, his cadre of undead harlots labored at digging up a grave. They had been the entire working staff of Madame Cybel's saloon, and since his arrival in the city, he had developed a deep affection for them. He was certain they were just as lovely on death as in life. They weren't quite as smart, however. Only one of them had kept the shovel he had given her. The others resorted to clawing the earth with their hands. Despite their inefficient technique, the crack of the lone shovel against wood proved they had reached their goal. He darted over to peer down into the grave, curious to see what state Philip Toomers was in. One of his girls pried open the casket lid with a strength she certainly hadn't possessed in life, and he saw the desiccated corpse of the late Mr. Toomers. Its time in the dry dirt had stretched the skin over the skull and high cheekbones and darkened it too. It looked like a mannequin made of boiled leather. Nature of the Uncle Seamus wants to know what you know, old boy. Come out and talk with me a bit, won't you? He cackled as one of his harem struggled to haul out the body. As the girl worked, he noticed a white speck land on her red dress. Blinking his eyes, thinking he was imagining it, he turned to look into the sky where he saw a swirl of clouds overhead and a dusting of snow beginning to accumulate around him. Snow? Isn't it July? Seamus asked of no one in particular. He was surprised when Molly answered him. Wiping her bloody mouth on her arm, Molly turned her eyes up to the sky. With a voice that sounded quite certain, she said, "It's December." As if responding to the sound of her voice, the wind turned with a sudden force, a blizzard springing up tight on its heels. Seamus drew his coat around him, feeling the chill in his bones. He watched, amazed, as drifts built up around him, blanketing the cemetery with fresh powder. Where the city had been clearly visible only moments ago, the swirling snow now hid it from sight. The whole world had shrunk around Seamus, and only the graveyard existed. Just a few yards from where he stood, a slope of snow formed against the side of a crypt. To Seamus's astonishment, the slope lurched. It was still for a moment. Then the snowdrift shuddered again, and a giant figure began to rise. It shook the snow from its body, revealing a titan, the ice of its body as blue and dead as the heart of a glacier. Seamus, amazed but unshaken, whispered a soft, things a wonder, before flinging open his coat. Holstered beneath was an ornate pistol, which he drew and leveled at the creature. The gun held only a single bullet. Seamus had never needed any more. With an ear-gouging blast, the golem was slammed against the crypt behind it. Molly, still seated on the crypt's roof, toppled to the ground as the structure crumbled beneath her. Seamus took no notice as he pulled Philip Toomer's corpse from the ground, ordering his undead harem out of the hole. All around him, the accumulating snow began to shiver and shake as tiny demons, smaller versions of the Titan appeared. With a curt gesture, Seamus sent his undead ladies to contend with the creatures. The monstrous women hissed like feral animals, freed from their leashes, and launched themselves upon the icy creatures, clawing them back to the ground. For every one rent to shards, more of the creatures appeared, and soon his rotten bells were overwhelmed. "Cybele," Seamus snapped, reloading his pistol. "Carry this body. Graveyard's getting a mite feisty." Unlike the rest of his undead entourage, who had been curvaceous and attractive in life, Cybele was round and fleshy. Undeath had gifted her already sturdy frame with additional strength, and she easily hefted Philip's body from the ground as she slung him over her shoulder. About to abandon the battles behind him, Seamus glimpsed the silhouette of a woman through the swirling snow. And what a silhouette! He would be the first to concede he was not the most focused of men, but what red-blooded male wouldn't take time for a profile like that? "Miss, you'd Mr. Toomer's sister?" he called out. "Lover? Fascinating family, to be true." The tempest stilled, the veil of snow falling away to reveal the woman. She wore a long coat, striped stockings, and boots with narrow heels. On her head, a warm furry hat and a pair of goggles, although he didn't care much for the goggles. Her voice was just as cold as the frigid wind. "No, but Philip Toomer's legacy belongs to me. Leave his body and go." "Now keep your thermals on, love," Seamus smirked. "Let's not be hasty. Tell you what, I'll ship him to you when I'm done with him. I swear it. You have an address in this city?" He didn't wait for her answer, lifting his pistol to fire on her. With a motion of her hand, slapped a sheet of snow across her, and she was gone. He didn't have much time to laugh at his own wit, for behind him he heard a hoarse grunt. Turning, he saw Cybele held aloft by the ice Titan. It had somehow survived, not just Seamus's elephant stopper, but also the collapse of the tomb, and now its cold fist was wrapped around Philip's torso. The creature attempted to shake Cybele's grip on the corpse, the fat madam hanging gamely from Philip's falling trousers. Molly, too, had managed to clear herself from the ruined crypt. After coughing a lungful of blood into the snow, she climbed to her feet and began to stagger toward her master. Lifting an arm weakly, she called in a faint voice, but the howl of wind drowned out her words. At any other time, Seamus would have been amused at the sight of Cybele flailing in the air, her fat legs swinging like stolen sausages in the mouth of a stray dog. His patience, however, had run short. Reloading his pistol, he fired directly into the chest of the blue golem, sending it staggering backwards. The golem's grip, and Cybele's too, remained true, and Philip's body lost the tug of war, pieces of him scattering into the snow. Cybele rolled away with a full set of legs, while the golem held grimly onto the torso as it toppled backwards, arms flailing. Behind it, the tiny form of Molly Squidgepidge stood motionless in the snow, the shadow of the construct completely eclipsing her. She was helpless as the giant teetered above her, lifting her arms to shield herself. The giant crashed down, just missing her, and the tremendous weight of its body broke through into the sunken tombs beneath. The cracked earth heaved as the creature vanished, and Molly's already unsteady legs lost their footing. Her arms windmilled awkwardly, and with a cry, she tipped backward and fell into Philip's open grave. Her misfortune had not concluded as a drift of snow shifted and spilled over into the grave, burying her. The corpse of Philip didn't fare much better. As the monster fell, Philip's head struck one of the gravestones and popped off like a cork from a bottle, spinning into the air in a high arc. Seamus held his breath as the lifeless head traveled through the air. His heart stopped as it plummeted to the earth, disappearing into the snow covering the ground. Directly across from him, in equal distance from where his head had landed, Seamus saw the woman with the fur hat. He narrowed his eyes, locking onto her icy gaze before he took off like a dart, racing towards his prize. The woman, too, rushed toward the head, but Seamus was the victor, diving forward and sliding through the snow. The head slipped through his fingers, as did his gun. Expecting an attack from the woman, he was dumbstruck as she sped past him. Sitting up, he dusted the snow from his face and watched as she bent over the dismembered torso, still in the clutch of her ruined golem. Reaching inside the man's jacket, she drew out a small object and held it aloft as if it were some great trophy. Seamus squinted, trying to identify the object. There was a book? I thought you were after its hat stand. He cradled the severed head with one arm and pointed his gun at the woman. The woman frowned, and for a second time a swirl of snow snapped like a sheet in a gale to obscure her presence. When it cleared again, she was gone. Overhead, the angry clouds of the storm began to dissipate, and the snow relented. Dusting himself off and rising to his feet, Seamus saw that the creatures his rotten bells had struggled with had become lifeless mounds of snow, and his girl seemed no worse for wear. Heaving a sigh, he went to check on Cybele, kicking her sharply, but he was certain, tenderly in the ribs. The morbid creature stirred and regained her feet with her usual grace. With a gesture, he summoned his grotesque companions to his side. Okay, let's go. I've got what I came for. Starting off towards the west, he held Philip's head before him. I hope you are worth all this effort, Mr. Toomers. As the group headed off, Molly lay forgotten and lifeless in Philip Toomer's grave. Yes, sir, the junior officer said with some disbelief. He'd never met a member of the Witch Hunter Task Force, but Deputy Samuel Hopkins didn't seem to look the part. The dusty old poncho and ragged wide-brimmed hat didn't live up to the mix of mystical and stately the young officer had expected. He did see the heavy six-shooter that hung on the man's hip and the round shield the man was holding in his face, emblazoned with a ram's head. Guild was spelled in gold letters across the bottom. It was proof that the man was who he claimed to be, the legendary Samuel Hopkins. Samuel tucked the badge beneath his poncho and ducked under the rope that marked the crime scene. The broken earth in the graveyard looked as if it had been upset by an earthquake, with upturned gravestones and crypts smashed to rubble. A light dusting of snow remained visible in the few small drifts undisturbed by the morning events. Several officers bustled themselves around the site searching for evidence. There's quite a lot of damage and only a single casualty, an innocent bystander from the looks of it. I suspect that it was some low-level turf war. On the outskirts of the city, this sort of gang violence happens frequently. The officer paused. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why was a witch hunter sent to investigate a simple case of vandalism? The snow didn't seem out of place to you, officer? Samael asked bluntly before hunkering down next to a cluster of footprints in the mud. He noted the direction of their travel and lifted his head, looking to the south into the city itself. Taking a small stick, he drew a square in the mud around one of the footprints. It was a slender print with a narrow boot heel. I want a cast of this print. I think we'll find this footprint matches those found outside the sanitarium last month. The officer knelt next to Samael, looking curiously over the man's shoulder. The sanitarium? There was an unseasonable snowstorm on the day of Philip Toomer's murder, too. Samael responded, rising to his feet. Philip Toomer's? The officer asked. Familiar with the case? No, but there's a Philip Toomer's buried in the graveyard, sir. His grave's been dug up. And gang fights generally involve the digging up of graves, do they? These are the sorts of details that would have been helpful when I asked you if there was anything significant earlier, officer, Samael responded. The two men walked over to the gravesite. Two other officers were already there, one scrawling notes on a clipboard. It was obviously not Philip Toomer's in the grave. The female body wore white burial clothes, and her long dark hair was tangled around her neck. A wide wound, slick with fresh blood, drenched her chest. Samael dropped to one knee and frowned. Hoist that body out of the grave. When none of the men moved, Samael stood and grasped a gaping officer by his collar, pulling him close. Guild, now, fetch the death marshals. The death marshals? Really? It sounded more like a plea than a question. That is Molly Squidpidge, Samael said. Seamus will come back for her. So that was the end of the story. I had intended to stop through it and voice my opinions or thoughts, but I just kept reading. So I will give those to you now. The part where the woman in the graveyard, the one that came with the snow, I wonder who she is. I actually have an idea who she is, but you'll find out in later episodes. Also, there was one other thing. Oh, when it started snowing and Seema said, "Isn't it July?" and Molly answered, "It's December." Do you think she was talking about the month of December, or do you think she might be referring to something else? Comment please below. Tell me what you think. I'd love to know what you think, where the story's going, what you think might happen, because like I said, I'm going to dive further into it. Next week, we will be covering the Outcasts. They happen to be one of my favorite factions. So in our next episode, we will be diving into that. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked it. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought. And I'm excited to continue the series. So I will see you next time.